My husband and my mother conspired to turn me into a commodity. The one thing they never saw coming? That the simple country girl they looked down on would be the one to put an end to it all. I am not the gentle Grandma Alara you might be used to. Today I am Alara, an 80-year-old woman with a score to settle and a truth to tell. From here in Denver, under a sky as vast as the life I've lived, I will break a silence that has lasted for nearly 60 years. This is not a confession, this is a reckoning. A story of betrayal by the ones I held dearest, and of the strength to rise from the ashes of ruin. Let us go back to 1966, when I was only 21 and still believed in sweet lies. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. At that time, I lived with my parents in a simple but cozy house. My father, Mr. Walter, was a hard-working man, a city bus driver respected by everyone in the neighborhood. My mother, Miss Lorraine, was a seamstress. She made custom clothes for the wealthy ladies of the city. We had a modest life, but we never lacked for anything, especially love and respect. My father was my hero, my safe harbor. When I was little, he would carry me on his shoulders through the Sunday market, buy me cotton candy behind my mother's back, and teach me how to ride a bike. When I became a young woman, he was the one who scared away the forward boys, who gave me advice about life, who dried my tears when a friendship disappointed me. "Alara, honey," he would always say with that thick German American accent, "in life, you'll find a lot of bad people disguised as good ones. Trust your instincts, they'll never deceive you." If I had listened to that advice to the end, maybe my story would be different. But life has its own plans, doesn't it? Everything started to change in the winter of 1965. It was a particularly cold November, the kind that makes your bones ache. My father started complaining of back pain, of a fatigue that wouldn't go away. At first, we all thought it was just the weight of years of hard work. Driving a bus on those potholed roads was no easy task. "It's just exhaustion, honey. It'll pass soon," he'd say, trying not to worry me. But it didn't pass. The pain worsened, he lost weight, and he started having trouble urinating. After much insistence from my mother and me, he finally went to the doctor. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. The cold office, the smell of rubbing alcohol, the doctor with thick glasses and a serious face. "Mr. Walter, you have a tumor on your prostate. We need to do more tests, but from what I'm seeing, it's already quite advanced." It was as if the world came crashing down on us. Cancer, at that time, was almost a death sentence, especially for those who didn't have money for expensive treatments. My father, always so strong, so full of life, was now facing an invisible enemy that consumed him from within. The following months were a nightmare. Hospitals, tests, medicines that cost an arm and a leg. My mother worked double time at the sewing machine, and I dropped out of my education courses to work as a cashier at a diner. We did everything we could to get money for the treatment, but the cancer was stronger. In less than 6 months, my father could no longer get out of bed. That strong man who used to carry cement bags on his back without complaining now weighed less than a child. The morphine no longer eased his pain, and his eyes, once so vibrant, now seemed distant, as if they were already seeing another world. On a rainy night in January of 1966, he called me to his bedside. He held my hand with a strength I didn't know he still had. "Alara," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "take care of your mother. She's strong on the outside but weak on the inside. And take care of yourself too. Don't ever let anyone diminish you." Those were his last words to me. In the early morning, as the rain battered the roof, my father departed from this world. He was only 52 years old. The funeral was simple, but the cemetery was full. It seemed like half the neighborhood was there to pay their last respects to Mr. Walter from the bus. Drivers, fare collectors, neighbors all with stories about how my father had helped them at some point, how he had been kind, honest, and hardworking. I just stood there in the light rain, unable to cry. It was as if a part of me had been buried along with him. The pain was so great I couldn't even express it. The days that followed were a blur. I would drag myself to the diner, serve customers like a robot, go home, and find my mother sitting in my father's armchair, staring into space. The house, once so full of life and laughter, now felt like a mausoleum. My mother changed after my father's death. Gradually, the strong, decisive woman I knew began to fade. She leaned on me for everything, placing the burden of household decisions on my 21-year-old shoulders. "You're just like your father," she would say. "Strong, decisive. I don't know how to live without him." At the same time, a bitterness I now realize had long been dormant began to surface. "He was a good man, Ilara," she'd say, her words laced with a strange poison. "But goodness doesn't buy you beautiful things." She started going out more, coming home late smelling of alcohol, and spending money we didn't have on expensive perfumes and clothes. When I questioned her, she would weep. "You don't understand, Ilara. I gave my best years to this house, to your father. I need to feel alive again, or I'll go crazy." I accepted her behavior as grief, blind to the fact that it was something else entirely. Ambition, finally unleashed. It was during this turbulent period that I met Leland. He showed up at the diner one April morning, asking for a loaf of sourdough and 2 cream-filled donuts. Tall, dark-haired, with green eyes that contrasted with his tanned skin and a smile that lit up the room. He was well-dressed, slacks, a button-down shirt, polished shoes, which already made him stand out in our simple neighborhood. "You have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen," he said as I bagged the bread. I blushed instantly, awkward with the compliment. I wasn't used to getting hit on, especially by such elegant men. "Thank you," I murmured shyly. "My name is Leland. I'm a lawyer. I just opened an office nearby. I'll become a frequent customer if the bread is as good as the service." He came back the next day, and the next, and the next, always during my shift, always with a discreet compliment, always buying something extra. Soon, he was bringing flowers to brighten up the place, he'd say, but everyone at the diner knew they were for me. One Friday, after almost 2 weeks of this routine, he finally worked up the courage. "Ilara, would you like to accompany me to a movie tomorrow? That new movie with Burt Reynolds is playing." I hesitated. I hadn't gone out with anyone since my father's death. I didn't have the mind, the time, or the desire. But there was something about Leland, maybe his kindness, maybe his respectful manner, maybe just the fact that he was a welcome distraction that made me accept. "Maybe," I replied, "but I have to be home early, my mother." Of course," he interrupted, smiling. "I'm a gentleman, Ilara. It will just be a movie, and maybe a snack afterward. I promise you'll be home safe and sound before 10. And so, our first date began. It was exactly as he promised. A movie, a snack at the corner diner, and before 10, I was home. He didn't even try to kiss me, just a gentle kiss on my hand as he said goodbye. "It was a wonderful evening," he said. "I hope we can do it again." My mother was suspicious when I told her I'd gone out with someone. "A lawyer? And what does a lawyer want with a simple girl like you?" Her words hurt me, but not enough to stop me from continuing to see Leland. In the following weekends, we went out more. Movies, the park, a walk along the shores of Lake Michigan. He was always kind, attentive, interested in what I had to say. He made me feel special, important. On our 5th date, he kissed me for the first time. It was sweet, respectful, without pressure. When we pulled apart, his green eyes shone with an intensity that left me breathless. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Ilara," he confessed. I had already been in love for a while. How could I not be? Leland was everything any girl dreamed of. Handsome, educated, hard-working, with a promising future. And most importantly, he treated me like a queen. Our relationship became official when he came to dinner at our house and asked my mother for permission. To my surprise, she was dressed up, perfumed, smiling, very different from the depressed woman I saw every day. "Of course, you can date," she said, serving Leland another slice of meatloaf. "My daughter deserves a good man." My mother's approval was the cherry on top. Finally, something good was happening in my life after so much suffering. Leland seemed to be the answer to my prayers, the ray of sunshine after the storm. "You're my angel, Alara," he used to say. "You appeared in my life when I least expected it and needed it most." In the following months, our romance blossomed. Leland would pick me up from the diner, take me to see places in Milwaukee I'd never been to, introduced me to his lawyer friends, took me to fancy restaurants where I felt out of place in my simple dresses. "Don't worry about it," he'd say when I mentioned my discomfort. "Soon you'll get used to this life. After all, it will be the life we have together." The first time we made love was during a weekend getaway. He rented a cabin in Aspen. He showered me with gifts and made me feel like the most special woman in the world. He was gentle, patient with my inexperience, and concerned with my pleasure. "I love you, Alara," he whispered as he held me afterward. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." 2 months later, the marriage proposal came. It was nothing extravagant, just the two of us sitting in the park where we used to walk. He took a small box out of his pocket, knelt, and asked the question every girl dreams of hearing. "Will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner, my best friend?" I accepted on the spot, of course. How could I not? Leland was the Prince Charming who had appeared in my life when everything seemed lost. He was kind, caring, successful. He loved me, respected me, wanted to build a future with me. When we told my mother about the engagement, her reaction surprised me. Instead of the joy I expected, she seemed worried. "Don't you think you're moving too fast?" she asked, her eyes fixed on Leland. "You've known each other for such a short time. When you're sure, Miss Lorraine, you don't need to wait," he replied confidently. "I love your daughter, and I want to make her happy." My mother eventually gave in. Of course, how could she object to such a perfect son-in-law? We started planning a simple wedding for the end of that year. That's when Leland made the proposal that would change our lives forever. "Alara," I was thinking, "why don't you and your mother sell this house and come live with me? My apartment is large, it has 3 bedrooms. Your mother wouldn't have to be alone, and we'd save on her rent." The idea caught me by surprise. Living all together, even before the wedding? It wasn't what I had imagined for the beginning of our life together. But Leland had convincing arguments. "Think about it, love. Your mother is alone, you worry about her. This way, you can take care of her, and we can start our life together. It's practical and economical." When we presented the idea to my mother, she hesitated again. "I don't know, honey. I don't want to get in the way of the beginning of your lives." "Nonsense, mother-in-law," Leland intervened with his usual charm. "You'll never be in the way. On the contrary, you'll help us. Alara is still young, inexperienced. She'll need your advice to be a good housewife." And so, 3 months before the wedding, we sold our little house in River West and moved into Leland's apartment in downtown Milwaukee. It was truly spacious, well-furnished, with a beautiful view of the city. I felt like a princess leaving the cottage for the castle. The first few weeks were a dream. Leland was the perfect fiancé, attentive, caring, always bringing small gifts, making me feel loved. My mother seemed more cheerful too, excited about the wedding preparations, making plans to decorate her new room. I should have noticed the first signs. The lingering glances Leland gave my mother when he thought I wasn't looking. The conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. The way my mother seemed increasingly dressed up, more perfumed, even without leaving the house. But I was blind with love and gratitude, blinded by the chance to have a better life than I ever dreamed of. Blinded by the promise of happiness that Leland represented. Too blind to see that Prince Charming was slowly revealing his true face. And that face was darker than my worst nightmares could imagine. It didn't take long for the fairy tale to start fading like an old cloth on the line. It was about 2 weeks after the move that I noticed the first changes in Leland. Small things at first, so subtle that I doubted what I was seeing. The first thing that struck me as odd was that he started coming home later from work. Before, when we were still dating, he made a point of being home at 6 on the dot. Now, he rarely arrived before 8 or 9 at night. When questioned, he always had the same excuse on the tip of his tongue. "The office is booming, love. Lots of new clients. It's a good sign, means more money for our married life. I believed him, of course. Why wouldn't I? He was a lawyer. People needed lawyers all the time. And besides, Leland had never given me any reason to doubt him. The second strange thing was the change in our intimacy. Once so affectionate, so present, now he always had an excuse not to touch me. I'm tired. I have to wake up early tomorrow. I have a headache. Justifications that sounded hollow but that I swallowed with a forced smile, saying I understood. It's normal, I consoled myself, talking to myself in the bathroom mirror. Every couple goes through phases like this. But the most disturbing thing was when he started sleeping in the living room. It started with one night, then two, and soon it became a routine. The excuse was always the same. I snore too much, love. You need to rest well to work at the diner in the morning. In the living room, I sleep on the couch and don't bother anyone. That bothered me deeply. What kind of fiancé sleeps separately from her fiancé because of snoring? But I swallowed this one too, as I had swallowed so many other things in life. After all, he was so good to me, so generous in welcoming my mother, so hard-working. Who was I to complain about minor details? Meanwhile, my mother seemed to be flourishing in that apartment. She, who after my father's death had become a sad shadow, now hummed around the house, did elaborate hairstyles, wore the most beautiful clothes she sewed. I should have been happy with this change, but something about it all bothered me, without me knowing exactly what. Your mom is so excited about the wedding, Leland commented one night during dinner. I think she's happy to see you well on your way. That made sense at the time. What mother wouldn't be happy to see her daughter about to marry a good man? I ignored that little voice in the back of my head that said there was something more happening right under my nose. It was on a Wednesday in September, just 3 months before our wedding, that the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. I had left the diner early with a headache and returned to the apartment without telling anyone. The idea was to lie down for a bit, have some tea, and feel better before Leland got home from work. When I opened the door, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. My mother's laughter, more jovial and light than I had heard in years. I approached silently, curious, when I heard a man's voice that I immediately recognized. Leland's. I froze in the hallway, not understanding. It was 2 p.m. What the hell was Leland doing at home at that hour? He was supposed to be at the office, working on those cases that kept him busy until late at night. She doesn't suspect a thing, I heard my mother say, her voice low but audible. Ilara was always too naive like her father, Leland replied, and they both burst out laughing. At that moment, I felt as if the floor had opened up beneath my feet. I backed away silently to the door and left without being noticed, my heart beating so hard I thought I would faint right there in the hallway. I walked aimlessly through the streets of Milwaukee, trying to process what I had just discovered. Leland was lying about working late. He and my mother were having conversations behind my back, laughing at me, calling me naive, and worse, comparing me to my father as if that were something bad, something worthy of a joke. I returned home hours later, after it had gotten dark. I found them both in the living room, watching television as if nothing had happened. "Where were you?" Leland asked, feigning concern. "I called the diner, and they said you had left early." "I went for a walk," I replied dryly. I needed to clear my head. That night, lying alone in the bed I was supposed to share with my future husband, I cried silently until I fell asleep. I didn't know exactly what was happening yet, but my heart already knew it was something terrible. In the days that followed, I started paying more attention. The knowing glances between them, the way they always seemed to be whispering when I wasn't around, Leland's increasingly frequent excuses for not spending time with me. "I have to sort out some wedding details," he'd say, leaving the house on weekends. "I'll go help him," my mother would add, grabbing her purse and following him. They would return hours later, always with vague stories about having seen venues, tasted cakes, chosen invitations, but they never brought back samples, never asked for my opinion. It was as if the wedding was happening between them, not between me and Leland. One night, while washing the dinner dishes, I heard a strange noise coming from my mother's room. Silently, I approached the ajar door and saw something I will never be able to erase from my memory. Leland, my fiancé, my future husband, in the arms of my own mother. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. A strange calm took over me as I returned to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes, as if nothing had happened. As if a part of me already knew, already expected it. Like a terminal diagnosis that only confirms what the patient already felt in their body. The next day, I packed my things in a small suitcase, ready to leave that apartment and never look back. But as I was leaving, Leland intercepted me at the door. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, blocking my path. "It's over, Leland. I saw you two last night." I expected denial, maybe anger or shame. What I didn't expect was the cynical smile that formed on his face. "So what? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You don't have a house anymore. You don't have money. You don't have anything or anyone." His words hit me like a slap. He was right. We had sold our house. The money from the sale had gone into a joint account that he controlled, supposedly for wedding expenses. I worked at a diner, earning a pittance. I had nowhere to go, no way to start over. "Stay," he said, in an almost conciliatory tone. "The wedding is still on. We need each other, Alara." "How so? After what you did with my mother?" He laughed, a cold laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Your mother and I have an arrangement. She has her needs. I have mine. But I need a presentable wife, someone to take to events, to give my name respectability. You're perfect for that." I was paralyzed, unable to process what I was hearing. Leland continued, approaching like a snake about to strike. "Think about it, Alara. A roof over your head, food on the table, nice clothes, a comfortable life. All you have to do is stay quiet and play the part of the devoted wife in public. And in private? I'll have to pretend I don't know you sleep with my mother? In private, we each live our own lives. I have mine, you can have yours, as long as it's discreet. Many marriages work this way. This wasn't a marriage, it was a business deal. A transaction where I would sell my dignity in exchange for material comfort. But I was cornered, with no options, no way out. "I need to think," I managed to say finally. "Think," he replied, moving away from the door. "But don't take too long, the offer has an expiration date." That night, I locked myself in my room and cried until I had no more tears. I cried for the love I thought I had found, for the double betrayal I suffered, for the memory of my father that seemed increasingly distant. And I cried mainly for myself, for the naive girl who believed in a fairy tale and ended up in a horror story. The next morning, Leland left early for work, or at least that's what he said. My mother, who usually avoided being alone with me since I moved into the apartment, knocked on my bedroom door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice so different from the loving mother I knew in my childhood. I let her in, more out of curiosity than any desire for reconciliation. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands restless in her lap, avoiding my gaze. "Leland told me you know," she began. "I know you two are sleeping together behind my back, yes, I know." She didn't deny it, didn't apologize, just nodded as if confirming a banal fact, like the cloudy weather outside. "He offered you a deal." "Yes, a disgusting deal where I pretend to be his wife while you two continue doing what you do." My mother finally raised her eyes to me, and what I saw in them scared me. There was no guilt, no remorse. There was only a cold, calculating determination. "Accept it, Alara. It's the best for all of us." "The best? How can it be the best for me to live a lie? Do you think your father and I lived a great love story? Do you think that sweaty bus driver was the man of my dreams?" Her words hit me like daggers. I had always believed my parents had a happy marriage, based on love and mutual respect. Hearing my mother talk like that about my father, especially after he had died so painfully, was unbearable. "Don't talk about him like that. He loved you. He took care of you until the end." "He was a good man," she admitted with a shrug. "But I deserved more. I always deserved more. Leland can give us that, Ilara. A life we never had, never would have otherwise. At the cost of my dignity? Of my father's memory? Dignity doesn't pay the bills, honey. Your father died and left us with nothing. We have to be practical. At that moment, looking at that woman I barely recognized, I understood that I had lost not only my father the year before, but also my mother. The woman in front of me was a stranger, someone for whom values like loyalty, honor, and family love meant nothing in the face of the prospect of material comfort. "I won't do it," I said finally, my voice firmer than I felt. "I won't live this charade." "Then where will you go? What will you do? Do you think with your diner salary you can rent a place to live in this city?" She was right, and we both knew it. I was trapped, with no way out. "I have a week to decide," I replied, more to buy time than because I was actually considering the proposal. My mother nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. Before leaving the room, she turned one last time. "Think with your head, not with your heart. The heart only serves to make us suffer." When the door closed, I felt a loneliness so profound it physically hurt. In less than 2 years, I had lost my father to cancer, my fiancé to betrayal, and now my mother to a greed I couldn't comprehend. I was completely alone in a world that seemed determined to destroy me. But something in her words, something in the coldness with which she spoke of my father, lit a flame inside me. A flame of anger, of indignation, of refusal to accept that situation as my final destiny. "I won't give up, Dad," I whispered into the emptiness of the room. "I won't let them win." That same afternoon, I pretended to accept the deal proposed by Leland. I smiled, said he was right, that it was the best for everyone. I saw the relief in his eyes, the pride in thinking he had bent me, defeated me. "You won't regret it," he said, giving me a kiss on the forehead like one rewards an obedient dog. "We'll have a great life together, our way." "Yes," I replied, smiling, while inside my blood boiled. "Our way." What Leland didn't know, what my mother couldn't imagine, was that the naive girl, the little Alara they judged so easy to manipulate, had died along with the last illusions about the love I thought I had found. In her place, a woman was being born, determined not only to survive, but to turn the tables on those who tried to destroy her. I needed a plan. I needed to be smart, patient, calculating everything I had never been, everything they wouldn't expect from me. And most importantly, I needed concrete proof of what was happening in that apartment, something that would give me bargaining power when the time came to act. For the following weeks, I maintained the role of the compliant fiancé. I smiled at the right moments, didn't question Leland's outings, pretended not to notice when he and my mother disappeared together for hours. I kept working at the diner, saving every penny I could hide, preparing for the moment I would need to flee. What I didn't know was that fate had even darker plans for me. Plans that would turn my life into a nightmare far worse than I could ever imagine, but which would also, ironically, give me the weapons I needed for my revenge. That's why I ask you from the heart, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. Knowing that my story can help someone already makes it all worthwhile. October 1966 arrived with an unseasonable cold in Milwaukee. The nights were longer, and I was more distressed each day inside that apartment that had become my prison. The wedding was set for December, less than 2 months away, and I still hadn't found a way out of that situation. Every penny I managed to hide from my salary at the diner went into the escape fund I created, kept in a cookie tin at the back of my closet. But the money accumulated slowly, insufficient to give me the freedom I so longed for. Leland and my mother were becoming more and more brazen. They no longer bothered so much to hide their affair, knowing that I had accepted the deal. They exchanged caresses in front of me, whispered in corners, laughed at private jokes during dinner. Every moment was a small torture, a stab in my already wounded heart. At that time, I worked from 5 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon at the diner. I would come home exhausted, but still had to do the household chores, cooking, cleaning, laundry. My mother, who was once an exemplary housewife, now barely lifted a finger to help. She spent her days beautifying herself, going shopping with Leland's money, living the life of a lady she had always dreamed of. "You should be grateful," she told me once, seeing my tired face as I prepared dinner after a full day at the diner. "Leland gives us a life your father never could." I bit my tongue to keep from responding, from saying what I really thought of her. Every insult to my father's memory was a stab, but I swallowed the pain, focused on my escape plan. One Friday at the end of October, Leland came home earlier than usual. He was agitated, his eyes shining in that way I had come to know well, the shine that appeared when he had some scheme in mind. "We need to talk," he announced during dinner. "I have an important proposal to make." My mother smiled as if she already knew what it was about. I kept my face neutral, although an alarm was sounding in my head. "The office isn't doing as well as I'd hoped," he began, surprising me. It was the first time he admitted any difficulty. "I need money to invest, to expand the business, but the banks have sky-high interest rates." "And what can we do?" I asked, genuinely curious. He exchanged a look with my mother before continuing. "I have a friend who pays very well for certain types of films." "Films? What kind of films?" My mother intervened, her voice strangely excited. "Homemade films, honey? Family films." I was confused for a moment. "Homemade films? Why would anyone pay for that? I don't understand." Leland cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "They're adult films, Alara. Films that show intimacy." The blood froze in my veins when I finally understood what he was proposing. "You want to make a pornographic film with me?" He laughed, a nervous laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Not exactly. My friend pays especially well for more unusual films. Films that show relationships between women of the same family." A heavy silence fell over the table as the implications of those words sank into my mind. He wanted to film me and my mother together. It was disgusting, unthinkable, criminal. "Are you crazy?" I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and disgust. "That's sick." "It's just a film," he replied, his voice suddenly harsh. "And they pay very well. Enough to solve all our financial problems. I won't do it. Ever." I stood up from the table, ready to run to my room, but Leland grabbed my wrist with surprising force. "Sit," he ordered, his green eyes now cold as ice. "We haven't finished talking." I looked at my mother, hoping she would defend me, that she would show some trace of the woman who raised me with love and protection. Instead, she just looked away, playing with the food on her plate. "You have no choice, Alara," Leland continued, still holding my wrist tightly. "The house you grew up in was sold. The money is with me. You have nowhere to go, no way to support yourself alone. Either you do what I'm asking, or you're out on the street." "I'd rather be on the street than suffer this degradation," I shouted, trying to break free. He squeezed tighter, making me whimper in pain. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a film, an hour, tops. No one you know will ever see it. And after that, we'll have enough money to live well, to realize all our dreams." "What dreams, Leland? You said you loved me, that you wanted to build a family with me." Something darkened in his gaze, a shadow that made me instinctively recoil. "Love is a luxury for those who don't have bills to pay, Alara. In the real world, you do what you have to do to survive." I finally managed to break free and ran to my room, locking the door. I leaned against it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest. They had gone completely insane. What Leland was proposing was criminal, immoral, repugnant. And my own mother seemed willing to participate. I stayed there for hours, sitting on the floor, my back against the door, thinking about all my options. I could run away that very night with the little money I had saved, but where would I go? How would I survive? Winter was coming, the nights getting colder. Without a guaranteed job, without a roof over my head, I could end up in an even worse situation. I thought about going to the police, reporting Leland for what he was proposing. But it would be my word against his, a respected lawyer against a simple diner clerk, and my mother would certainly side with him. Who would believe me? Sometime in the middle of the night, exhausted from crying and thinking, I fell asleep right there on the floor. I woke up to insistent knocking on the door. "Alara, open up. We need to talk." It was my mother's voice, not Leland's. I hesitated, but eventually opened the door. She entered quickly, closing it behind her. "You have to do this, honey," she said without preamble. "We have no other choice." "There's always another choice, Mom," I replied, my voice hoarse from crying. "How can you even consider something like this? It's your daughter, your own blood." She sighed, sitting on the edge of my bed. "You don't understand how the world works, Ilara. You think life is a fairy tale, that good always wins, that love solves everything? It's not like that. It never was. Didn't your father teach you that?" "He was a good, honest man, and he died leaving us in poverty," she retorted, her voice bitter. "Honesty doesn't fill your stomach, honey. Leland can give us a life we've never dreamed of. At the cost of my dignity? Of yours? What would Dad say if he saw this?" Something flashed in her eyes, guilt perhaps, but it quickly vanished. "Your father is dead. We are alive. And we need to survive." She stood up, smoothing the new dress that Leland had surely bought. "Think about it. The alternative is the street." When she left, I fell to my knees on the floor, sobbing. How had it come to this? How had my life turned into this nightmare in such a short time? A year ago, I was a beloved daughter with a united family, dreaming of the future. Now I was trapped in an apartment with two people who planned to use me in the worst possible way. "Dad," I whispered into the emptiness of the room, "help me, give me strength, show me a way." But no answer came, only the oppressive silence of those walls that now seemed like a prison. That night during dinner, Leland returned to the subject as if we were discussing something perfectly normal, like the color of the curtains or the week's menu. "So, Ilara, have you thought about my proposal?" I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, unable to look at him. "I'm not doing it," he sighed, like a patient father with a stubborn child. "Do you know how much they're offering? $15,000. It's a fortune. We could pay off all the office debts, maybe even buy a bigger house." $15,000 was indeed a lot of money, more than I would earn in years working at the diner. For a moment, I understood why my mother was tempted, but the moral price was too high. "No," I repeated, my voice firmer. "You can kick me out, leave me on the street, but I won't do it." Leland's face hardened, the mask of kindness falling completely. "It's a shame you think that way." "A real shame." His tone alarmed me. There was an implicit threat there, something I couldn't decipher at the moment, but that made every hair on my body stand on end. After dinner, I locked myself in my room again, determined not to leave until the next morning when I would go to work. My shift started at 5, so I would leave the house at 4:30 when they were both still asleep. On the way to the diner, I would think of a better plan. Maybe ask my boss, Mrs. Gable, who had always been kind to me, for help. At some point, I fell asleep, the emotional exhaustion finally overcoming my anguish. I woke with a start to a noise. The room was dark, only the faint light from the nightstand lamp illuminating the outlines of the furniture. I sat up in bed, disoriented, not knowing what had woken me. It was then that I noticed a shadow moving near the door. My heart raced. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's me, honey." It was my mother, but her voice was strange, slurred. I could make out her silhouette approaching the bed. The strong smell of alcohol reached my nostrils even before she sat on the edge of the mattress. "Mom, are you okay?" She laughed, a laugh I didn't recognize, bitter, cold, almost cruel. "Nothing is okay, Ilara. Nothing ever was." Her hand touched my face, a touch that should have been maternal, but that sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. "You look so much like your father," she continued, her voice increasingly slurred. "The same eyes, the same stubborn way. Mom, you've been drinking. You should go back to your room." I didn't finish the sentence. Her hand, which had been stroking my face, moved down my neck, over my shoulders, in a caress that was anything but maternal. I froze, unable to process what was happening. "Mom!" I finally exclaimed, pulling away. "What are you doing?" It was then that I noticed another presence in the room. A male silhouette near the door, watching. Leland. "What's going on?" I asked, panic rising in my voice. "The film, Ilara?" he replied calmly. "Since you didn't want to cooperate willingly, it'll have to be the hard way." Only then did I notice what he was holding in his hands. A camera. One of those old, heavy home movie cameras. A small red dot indicated it was already recording. "No!" I screamed, trying to get out of bed, but my mother held me with surprising strength. "Be quiet," she whispered, her alcohol-laden breath making me turn my face away. "It'll be easier if you don't resist." What followed was the worst nightmare anyone could imagine. My own mother, the woman who should have protected me against everything and everyone, trying to force me to participate in that abomination while Leland filmed, giving instructions like a macabre director. I fought with all my strength, screamed until my throat was raw, but the apartment was large, the walls thick, the neighbors distant. No one would come to save me. At some point, my mother lost patience with my resistance. The first slap came as a shock, not from the pain, but from the realization that this woman, my own mother, was capable of physically assaulting me. "Stop it!" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "You're my mother!" "And you're ungrateful?" she replied, her eyes glazed over by alcohol and something else I couldn't identify. "After everything I've done for you." The second slap was harder, leaving me dazed. Taking advantage of my moment of weakness, she violently tore off my nightgown, exposing me to the camera that Leland held. "Great." I heard his voice, distant, as if in a bad dream. "Keep it up." What followed was a session of physical and psychological torture. My mother, completely out of her mind, beat me with a belt she had brought. Each blow left red welts on my skin, but the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the emotional agony of being abused by my own mother. Leland filmed everything, occasionally giving instructions, laughing when I cried out in pain, clearly excited by my suffering. At some point, I stopped fighting. My body was exhausted, my mind beginning to shut down as a defense mechanism. When it was finally over, I was sprawled on the bed like a rag doll. Red marks covered my body, blood trickled from a cut on my lip where the belt had hit me. My mother, apparently satisfied with her performance, staggered out of the room, leaving me alone with Leland. He approached the bed, the camera still on, capturing my final humiliation. "See?" he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "It didn't have to be this way. If you had cooperated, it would have been easier." I didn't answer. I had no strength, no will. I just wanted him to leave me alone with my pain and shame. "This film will make us a lot of money," he continued, apparently interpreting my silence as acceptance. "My friend said there's a specific market for this type of content. Incest, violence. Some people pay fortunes for it." The word incest pierced the fog of pain that enveloped my mind. That's what they had done to me. That's what they would call the abuse I suffered. "Rest up," he said, finally turning off the camera. "You don't have to go to work tomorrow. Say you're sick." When the door closed behind him, I lay motionless on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the tears drying on my face. Something had broken inside me that night. Not just my trust in people, my faith in family love. Something deeper, more essential. But as I lay there, listening to the muffled laughter coming from the living room, where my mother and Leland were probably celebrating their macabre achievement, a new emotion began to take the place of pain and shame. An emotion I had never felt with such intensity. Hatred. A pure, crystalline hatred that cleared my mind like a lightning bolt on a dark night. They had stolen everything from me, my dignity, my innocence, my trust in the world. But I would not let them steal my future. I would not let them get away with what they did. Slowly, ignoring the pain in every inch of my body, I got out of bed. I dragged myself to my bathroom, where I took a hot shower, letting the water wash away the physical marks of that night, knowing the emotional scars would remain forever. Then, lying in bed again, I began to formulate a plan. Not a plan of escape, like before. A plan of revenge. A revenge that would be so complete, so devastating, that Leland and my mother would bitterly regret the day they decided to make me their victim. That October night in 1966 marked the end of the naive girl I once was. In her place, a woman was born, determined to take justice into her own hands, no matter the price she had to pay. The sun had not yet risen when I opened my eyes the next morning. My whole body ached. Every movement was a brutal reminder of the night before. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound. The apartment was silent. Leland and my mother were probably still asleep, exhausted after their drinking and the violence they had inflicted on me. I took the small hand mirror and examined the damage. My lip was cut and swollen. Red marks, some already purple, covered my arms, back, and legs. I had a cut on my eyebrow that I didn't remember how I got, but the worst part was my eyes. My eyes were different, as if something fundamental had been altered in them forever. "It ends today," I whispered to my reflection. "One way or another." I dressed carefully, putting on a long-sleeved blouse to hide the marks on my arms. In the kitchen, I made coffee as if it were a normal day, trying to make as little noise as possible. As the water boiled, my mind worked on the plan I had devised during the sleepless night. The first step was to find the camera. Leland had surely hidden it somewhere, probably locked up so I couldn't access it, but he underestimated my determination. I finished making the coffee and returned silently to the hallway, stopping in front of the door to the room they shared. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard Light snoring, still sleeping soundly. Leland's office was at the end of the hall. He always kept it locked, but I knew where the spare key was kept, in the potted plant in the living room, buried shallowly in the dirt. How many times had I seen him hide it there, thinking I didn't notice? With a pounding heart, I got the key and opened the office door. The room was in semi-darkness, the curtains closed, blocking the little light of dawn. I closed the door behind me and turned on the small lamp on the desk. Where would he keep the camera? My eyes scanned the room methodically, the shelf of law books, the desk full of papers, the file cabinet. I decided to start with the most obvious place, the desk drawers. The first contained only office supplies, the second various documents. The third was locked. Bingo, I thought, a chill running down my spine. I looked around for something I could use to open the drawer. I found a metal letter opener on the desk. Carefully, I inserted it into the lock and manipulated it until I heard a soft click. The drawer slid open, revealing its contents. There was the camera, along with several used tapes labeled with dates and names I prefer not to recall. Apparently, I was not their first victim. I picked up the camera with trembling hands, checking if it still had the tape from the night before. It was there. The evidence of all the brutality I suffered, recorded forever on film. But it wasn't just the camera that interested me. I continued searching the drawer and found a folder with documents. When I opened it, my heart almost stopped. They were papers from the sale of our house, deposit slips, bank statements. All the money that was supposedly being saved for the wedding had been diverted to an account solely in Leland's name. I took the camera and the most important documents, putting them in the bag I had brought with me. I closed the drawer and put the letter opener back exactly where it was. I left the office, locked the door, and returned the key to the potted plant. The second step of my plan was riskier. I needed to leave the apartment without being noticed and get to the nearest police station. The problem was, I wasn't sure if I could get back before they woke up. If they noticed my absence and saw that the camera was gone, I would be in great danger. I decided to risk it. I grabbed my coat, the bag with the evidence, and left the apartment silently. The living room clock read 5:15 a.m. The streets of Milwaukee were still deserted, the cold late October air cutting my face. I walked quickly, ignoring the pain I still felt in my body. The nearest police station was about 15 blocks away. I could take a bus, but they were rare at that hour, and I couldn't waste time waiting. As I walked, I mentally rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain the unimaginable, how I would put into words the horror I had lived through. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought it was my invention, a form of revenge against my mother and my fiancé? When I finally arrived at the station, I was breathless and sweaty despite the cold. The officer at the desk, a middle-aged man with deep dark circles under his eyes, looked at me suspiciously. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. "I need to report a crime. An assault against me. He pointed me to a chair and called another, younger officer. I told my story as clearly and directly as I could, without omitting any details, no matter how painful. Their faces went from initial suspicion to shock, then to restrained anger. "And you have proof of this?" the older one asked when I finished my account. I opened my bag and took out the camera. "It's all here. They filmed everything." The younger officer took the camera carefully, as if it were something that could contaminate him. "We're going to need to see this." "I know," I replied, my voice choked with emotion, "but I don't want to be present when you watch it." They agreed and took me to a separate room, where a female officer was called to formally take my statement and photograph my injuries. Meanwhile, the two officers went to watch the tape in the next room. 20 minutes later, the older officer returned, his face pale, his eyes hard as stone. "Ma'am," he said, his voice controlled, "we are going to arrest these people immediately. Would you like to accompany us, or would you prefer to stay here at the station?" A part of me wanted to see their faces when the police arrived, wanted to witness the moment they realized their game was over. But another, wiser part knew it would be too traumatic. "I'd prefer to stay here," I replied. "I understand. We'll send a car right away. Is there anyone else in the apartment besides those two?" "No, just them." "Excellent. Rest easy, ma'am. They won't hurt anyone anymore." I sat in a hard chair at the station, drinking the weak coffee the officer offered me, waiting for news. Time seemed to drag on, each minute lasting an eternity. I imagined 1,000 scenarios. Them escaping before the police arrived, resisting arrest, denying everything. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of cars parking abruptly outside, raised voices, slamming doors. I stood up instinctively, moving to the window. I saw them pull my mother and Leland out of the police car, both handcuffed. She was crying uncontrollably. He had an impassive face, as if none of this was real. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. Not joy, not relief, not satisfaction. Just an immense emptiness, as if a part of me had died that night and would never come back. The older officer came to me. "We found more tapes in the apartment, lots of tapes. It seems they've been doing this for a while, with other victims. Your fiancé confessed that he sold this material. Your mother is claiming she was coerced, that she was under the influence of alcohol and drugs." I wasn't surprised. It was typical of her to evade responsibility for her own actions. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly exhausted. "They'll be held in custody. The case is serious. No bail." "Do you have somewhere to go? Any relatives, friends?" I shook my head. I had no one. My whole family was right there. One arrested for assaulting me, the other for filming and encouraging it. "There are shelters for women, victims of violence," he suggested, with a kindness unusual for a man of that era. "I can contact social services." "That won't be necessary," I replied, an idea forming in my mind. "There's one person who might be able to help me." I left the police station feeling strangely light, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The sun was already high in the sky. People were moving through the streets, oblivious to the drama I had lived through in the last few hours. I took a bus to the diner where I worked. Mrs. Gable, my boss, widened her eyes when she saw me walk in, my lip cut, my eye bruised, the way I moved with difficulty. "My God, child, what happened to you?" Between tears and sobs, I told her everything. I omitted nothing. I didn't soften the most sordid details. She listened in silence, horror growing on her kind face. When I finished, she hugged me tightly, ignoring the customers waiting to be served. "You'll stay here, Ilara. I have a small room in the back where you can stay until you get on your feet. No one will hurt you again. I promise." That unexpected kindness, coming from someone who wasn't even a relative, made me cry again. But this time, they were tears of relief, of gratitude, perhaps even of hope. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. "Lawyer and mother-in-law arrested for abusing young woman," blared the headline of the local paper. My name wasn't mentioned, thank God, but the story was clear enough for anyone who knew those involved. The trial was swift by the standards of the time. The evidence was irrefutable. The tapes, my injuries, the testimonies of other victims who were identified and had the courage to come forward. Leland and my mother were sentenced to several years in prison. I never visited them. To me, they were both dead. The money from the sale of our house was judicially recovered and returned to me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start my life over. I continued working at Mrs. Gable's diner for a few more months, living in the back room, saving every penny. In mid-1967, I made a drastic decision. I needed to leave Milwaukee. There were too many memories there, too many people who knew my story, too many looks of pity that followed me through the streets. I wanted a place where no one knew me, where I could just be Alara, not the girl from that terrible case. Aspen, Colorado, seemed like the perfect place. Small, touristy, with job opportunities, and far enough from Milwaukee to give me a new beginning. Using the money I had saved, I rented a small apartment near the center and started looking for a job. That's how I ended up as a waitress at the Summit Lodge, a traditional restaurant that served fondue and other typical dishes to tourists. The work was demanding, especially on weekends and holidays, but it paid reasonably well, and the tips supplemented my income. Slowly, I rebuilt my life. I made friends, learned to trust again, not completely, never completely, and even started to smile from time to time. The memories of that night of terror never completely disappeared, but they became more distant, like a nightmare that loses its power over time. It was at the Summit Lodge that I met Silas in July of 1969. He came from Denver, a lawyer like Leland, but as different from him as day is from night. He was on vacation in Aspen and came to dinner at the restaurant 3 nights in a row, always sitting in my section. On the 3rd night, he worked up the courage and invited me for coffee after my shift. I politely declined. The last thing I wanted was to get involved with another man, especially another lawyer. He didn't insist. He respected my decision. But he came back the next night, and the next, always kind, always respectful. Slowly, his gentle persistence broke down my barriers. Just 1 coffee, I finally agreed, after almost 2 weeks. Nothing more. The coffee turned into a walk by the lake, the walk into a movie, the movie into dinners. When his vacation ended, I thought I would never see him again. To my surprise, he came back the following weekend, and the next, and the next. "It's almost a 6-hour drive from Denver to here," I commented, genuinely perplexed by his dedication. "For you, I would drive much further," he replied, with that honest simplicity that was his trademark. It took me a long time to tell him about my past. I was afraid of his reaction, afraid of seeing disgust, pity, or disbelief in his eyes. When I finally gathered the courage, almost a year after we met, his response surprised me. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this," he said, holding my hands firmly. "I can't change what happened. I can't erase that pain. But I promise that as long as I live, I will do everything to make sure you never feel vulnerable again, never have to be afraid again." I married Silas in December of 1970 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Aspen. Mrs. Gable came from Milwaukee to be my matron of honor. I had no other guests on my side. All my family was dead to me, literally or figuratively. We moved to Denver, where Silas had his law practice. Adjusting to the big city was difficult at first, but he was patient, giving me time and space to get used to it. He never pressured me to work outside the home, although I eventually chose to do so, opening a small bakery inspired by the sweets I learned to make in Aspen. Our first son, Walter, born in 1972, was named after my father. 3 more followed: Leo, Rose, and Martin. I raised my children with the love and protection I did not receive in the final phase of my childhood. I never laid a hand on them, never used harsh words, never made them feel less than the extraordinary people they are. Silas was the partner I never dreamed I could have. Patient in the moments when the nightmares returned, understanding when certain triggers made me retreat into myself, firm when I needed strength to continue. Our marriage wasn't perfect, what marriage is, but it was built on solid foundations of respect, honesty, and genuine love. The scar from that October night never completely disappeared. There are moments, even now, so many decades later, when a smell, a sound, an image briefly transports me back to that dark room. But I've learned to live with these memories, without letting them define who I am. I am Alara. I am a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I am a survivor. And every day that I wake up next to the man who taught me to trust again, every smile from my children and grandchildren, every small joy of daily life, I defeat that terrible night all over again. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing my abusers behind bars. It was building a full, happy, and meaningful life despite what they tried to take from me. It was proving, mainly to myself, that evil can leave scars, but it doesn't have to poison the future. And that, my dears, is the greatest victory anyone can achieve. Time is the master of all things, my dears. It heals, transforms, softens the roughest edges of our pain. Of course, some wounds are so deep they never fully heal. We just learn to live with them, like old companions on a journey. Denver welcomed me like a mother I never truly had. The big, noisy, chaotic city became my refuge, my new beginning. No one there knew my past. No one looked at me with that mixture of pity and morbid curiosity that bothered me so much in Milwaukee. I was just Alara, Silas's wife, then the mother of Walter, Leo, Rose, and Martin. In the early years, I confess, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every man in a suit who vaguely resembled Leland made me freeze in the middle of the street. Every news story about criminals getting out of prison kept me awake at night, wondering if he would come after me. Silas noticed this fear without me needing to verbalize it and made a point of periodically checking Leland's legal status, assuring me that he remained imprisoned, far from us. "He will never hurt you again," Silas would repeat whenever I woke up screaming from a nightmare. "I'm here. I always will be." And he was. Always by my side at the appointments with the psychologist I finally started seeing in 1973, after the nightmares became so intense they affected my ability to care for little Walter. Always supporting me when I decided to open my bakery, even though it meant less time at home. Always respecting my boundaries in intimacy, understanding that there were days when I simply couldn't bear to be touched, even by him. Therapy was a turning point in my life. Dr. Helen, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, helped me process the trauma in a way I never imagined possible. "What happened to you was terrible, Alara," she told me in our first session. "But it's not who you are. It's something that happened to you, not something that defines you." It took me years to truly internalize those words, to separate Alara from the traumatic event, to understand that I wasn't the girl who was abused by her mother and fiancé, but Alara, woman, wife, mother, baker, a complete person with dreams, desires, talents, and flaws, like anyone else. The Sweet Chapter Bakery opened its doors in 1976 in a small rented space in the Cherry Creek neighborhood. I started modestly, just me and an assistant, making fine cakes and pastries for parties. At first, my clients were mainly Silas's friends and their wives, who ordered out of kindness or curiosity. But soon, the quality of my work began to speak for itself, and the business grew organically. Working with sweets was therapeutic for me. The precision of the recipes, the necessary concentration, the transformation of simple ingredients into beautiful and delicious creations, all of it anchored me in the present, kept me from getting lost in memories of the past. By 1978, when Martin, my youngest, was born, the bakery had already expanded to a larger space and had 5 employees. Balancing motherhood of 4 children with a growing business wasn't easy, but Silas was always a present father, something rare for that era. "We're partners," he'd say. "Your struggle is my struggle, your joy is my joy." It was in that same year that I received a letter that would once again change the course of my life. The envelope had the seal of the Department of Corrections, and my first instinct was to throw it away without opening it. But something made me hesitate, and I ended up reading its contents. It was an official notification. Leland had died in prison, the victim of a heart attack. I felt no joy, no satisfied revenge, not even immediate relief. What I felt was more like the closing of a chapter, the conclusion of a story that no longer had power over me. I showed the letter to Silas and to Dr. Helen, at my next therapy session. "What do you want to do with this information, doctor?" Helen asked, always direct. "Nothing," I replied after a moment's thought. He hasn't had a place in my life for a long time. And it was true. Sometime between raising my children, developing my business, and building a full life with Silas, Leland had become just a distant ghost, without substance, without power. The 1990s arrived, bringing changes to our family. Walter, my firstborn, went to law school, following in his father's footsteps. Leo chose engineering, Rose medicine, and Martin, always the artist of the family, opted for architecture. Watching them grow up strong, secure, seeking their own paths, was my greatest joy and also my greatest victory over the past. "You've raised wonderful children." My mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor, commented during Walter's graduation party in 1994. "We raised them," I corrected, looking lovingly at Silas. "Every one of their achievements has a bit of both of us." The bakery that started so small had turned into a chain with 3 locations spread across Denver. I never wanted to expand too much, preferring to maintain the quality control and personal touch that were always our trademark. I still personally tested every new recipe, still made a point of knowing every employee by name, still got emotional when customers came back to say that our sweets had made their special moments even more memorable. In 1997, at the age of 52, I became a grandmother for the first time. Maria, Walter's daughter with his wife Carla, was born on a sunny April morning. Holding that little 7-pound bundle in my arms, smelling her baby scent, seeing the future unfolding in her curious little eyes, was an indescribable emotion. "Grandma," I whispered, testing the title out loud for the first time. Grandma Elara. How different it sounded from the Grandma Lorraine my mother never got to be. How it carried a different weight, a different meaning, a different promise. I promised myself at that moment that I would be for Maria and for all the grandchildren who came after her the opposite of what my mother was to me. I would be a safe harbor, not a threat. I would be unconditional love, not manipulation. I would be protection, not danger. In the following years, our family continued to grow. More grandchildren arrived: John, Beatrice, Lucas, Sophia, Peter, and Grant. Each one brought their own light, their own flavor to our lives. Silas and I delighted in spoiling them, in watching them grow, in participating in their lives in a way our jobs didn't always allow with our own children. In 2007, at 62 years old, I decided to gradually step back from the daily management of the bakery. Rose, who had surprised everyone by abandoning medicine in her 3rd year to study gastronomy, took over the reins of the business with competence and passion. "I learned from the best," she'd say, filling me with pride. Silas also began to reduce his workload at the law firm, passing more cases to Walter, who had become his partner. We started traveling more, seeing places we had always dreamed of visiting: Paris, Rome, London, New York. Each trip was an adventure, a celebration of the freedom we had earned, of the life we had built together. It was during our trip to Portugal in 2009 that Silas had his first warning. A sudden malaise during a walk in Sintra, a tightness in his chest that he tried to hide but that alarmed me immediately. We rushed back to the United States, straight to a battery of tests. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut: advanced coronary artery disease. He would need bypass surgery as soon as possible. "Don't worry," he tried to reassure me, seeing the terror in my eyes. "We've faced worse things together." The surgery was a success, thank God, but the recovery was long and difficult. For the first time in our marriage, the roles were completely reversed. Now it was I who needed to be the rock, the safe harbor, the unshakable force. I cared for him with all the love and dedication he had always given me. I learned about medications, special diets, recommended exercises. I transformed our house to facilitate his recovery. I was by his side at every appointment, every test, every small victory on the road to rehabilitation. "You're my guardian angel," he would say, holding my hand during physical therapy sessions. "I'm just paying you back," I would reply, knowing I could never fully repay everything he did for me. Silas recovered, but he was never the same. He became more fragile, more contemplative, more aware of the finiteness of life. We decided it was time to enjoy every moment we had together to the fullest. We sold our large house in the suburbs, where we raised our children, and bought a smaller apartment that was easier to maintain. We began to divide our time between Denver and a small cottage in the mountains, where we grew our own vegetables and fruits, hosted the grandchildren on weekends, and watched breathtaking sunsets. In 2010, we celebrated our ruby anniversary, 40 years of marriage. The party, organized by our children, brought together family, friends, former employees, people who had crossed our path over the decades. It was a celebration not just of our love, but of the life we built together, the obstacles we overcame, the family we created. If I could go back in time, Silas told me during our dance, I would marry you 1,000 times over. Looking at him, at the wrinkles that framed his kind eyes, at his now completely white hair, at the smile that still made my heart race, I knew I would say the same. Despite everything, despite the traumatic start to my adult life, I ended up having more luck in love than I ever imagined I deserved. It was in early 2012 that I lost Silas. Not to a widespread illness, but to a second, massive heart attack. We were at the cottage, planting strawberries he would never see grow, when he simply fell beside me, without warning, without a chance to say goodbye. The pain of the loss was overwhelming, different from any other I had ever experienced. It was a pain of amputation, as if half of me had been suddenly torn away. The sheer suddenness of it made the grief even harder. Everything was a blur of shock and disbelief. The funeral felt small and hurried, a whirlwind of logistics that left little room for the profound, shared mourning that Silas deserved, leaving me feeling isolated in my own sea of sorrow. But even in the deepest pain, even in the most acute absence, I found strength in the life we built together, in the children we raised, in the grandchildren we adored, in the legacy of love and respect that Silas left behind. When I share my story, my dears, I'm not looking for pity. I want to give you something much more precious. A map. A living map to prove that even from the ashes, we can rebuild a truly radiant life. And if this map truly means something to you, if it sparks even a little bit of hope, I would be so happy if you would join me in spreading that message. First, please like this video. Think of it as a small signal you're sending out, a declaration that you are choosing hope over fear. Next, please subscribe to the channel. Because our healing journey is a long one, and I want to be with you for the stories yet to come. And finally, the part I look forward to the most. Please leave a comment below. It doesn't have to be long. Just answer this one question for me. What is the greatest lesson that the storms of your life have taught you? Believe me, your simple, heartfelt wisdom could be a lifeline for someone else reading it. And of course, no one has to dance alone. If you need a shelter, a warm embrace when the storm outside is too great, please join our channel. The link is right below in the description. It's a place for souls that refuse to be broken, a place where we listen, share, and never judge. Always remember the words my late husband used to say, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain. The night can be long, but the dawn is inevitable. Now, it's your turn. Show the world your own beautiful dance.